Utilizing n8n's execute subworkflow trigger and node really expands the opportunities of what you can do within the software. It allows you to make it more modular and reuse parts of workflows within multiple workflows, allows for parallel processing as well as webhook management. And in today's video, we're going to be going over a few different examples of how we could do each of these step by step. Really quick though, before we jump into this tutorial, if you guys would like to network with other people that are interested in n8n and AI, and then want to use these skills to either land freelance customers, improve their data job from like a data analyst into a data scientist or AI engineer, or want to help automate sections of their own business, I have a free school community, which is going to be linked down below. I'm super active in it, and we have a really awesome community of people that want to learn together and implement these skills. So make sure to join our community. With that being said, let's start this video. So before we jump into our examples, I want to go over 5 concepts of why we want to use the execute subworkflow. In addition, you'll see we have 6 examples here, and yeah, so let's jump into it. Obviously, I like trying to show examples as soon as possible, but we need to first put ourselves in the framework of like, why do we want to use execute subworkflows? The first was you can reuse the same logic in multiple workflows. So let's say you have a repeated logic that you have to use across 3 or 4 workflows. It's better to have this centralized in one spot rather than have this logic in multiple places. In programming, for those that are coming from that side, this is kind of like building out a function. You wouldn't want to write the same exact code for a function 5 times within a program. You would want to create a function once and then call it over and over again. In addition, I see a lot of slop online when it comes to n8n workflows, that there's like 100 plus nodes sometimes. And it's crazy to me because it's just not, well, number one, it's not efficient. And number 2, like you don't know what's going on that side of things. So it's better when you have a very large workflow, it's better to break it down into smaller workflows when possible. In addition, like I kind of already talked about this with the maintenance side of things. So when you're reusing multiple parts and you're breaking down a larger workflow, it's much easier to maintain that small section. Again, with the programming side of things, it's much easier to maintain one function than it is that code 5 times throughout a program. All right, another one is going to be improving performance as well as parallel execution. So Subworkflows allow parallel processing, and this will enable you to run your workflows a little bit faster. We'll cover that, I believe, in example 6 today. And lastly, when you work with webhooks or guardrails, it's very common to use subworkflows. So sometimes you'll want to bring in a webhook on one workflow, process it, and then send it to another workflow. Or for guardrails, if something is flagged in a prompt, you want to notify people, and that logic might be the same across multiple guardrails. So you'd want to have an execute sub workflow. And I say that, I literally recorded my guardrails video yesterday. I'm like, man, I should have put in execute sub workflow over there, but a really great benefit of it. So sometimes when you see videos or discussions about sub workflows, you'll see them all in the same frame. Like we'll have this call execute sub workflow, and sometimes people put it over here, the second one. I don't want to do that for this video. What we're going to do is actually have 2 different workflows over here. So we actually have one called execute sub workflow on this side of it. And then we have our execute sub workflow over here. So first things I want to show you is how do you get to execute sub workflow? So just click the plus icon. We're going to search execute, and you'll see it says execute sub workflow, helpers for calling other n8n workflows, used for designing modular microservices like workflows. You click in over here and you have a node, which is an action over here, execute a sub workflow, and then you have one executed by another workflow. So how this works is ideally we have some sort of start of a workflow, it goes across over here, and at a certain point, we're going to say, hey, let's actually call another workflow. And what this does is this node will take you to another workflow. So for example, this node will take me to this one that I have over here called execute sub workflow, and it actually starts this workflow. So as soon as items populate over here, and there's 2 different ways that we could technically start this. We'll cover this in a bit. But as soon as we have items coming in over here, it starts this workflow and we can process information. Now, this is a very, very basic example. I did that for the video because it doesn't make sense for me to build out a 30-minute to an hour workflow and teach this concept. I want to keep it basic for you guys. So again, just remember, like to start it has to have this node, and then it goes over here and we have a trigger. So node first, trigger second. So with that being said, let's do a basic MVP, which is the minimal viable product, to get you satisfied with how to start using this workflow. So what we're going to do is set up the node and trigger. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a manual execution. So I just set up that trigger over here. Just search for manual like this, manual trigger. What I'm doing next is I'm doing an edit set fields. All I'm doing is putting in a cricketer named Jack Hobbs. He played in the early 1900s, phenomenal cricket player. I'm just calling this as a string. So again, super basic. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have the execute sub workflow. So this is the node. And what we have over here is we do our source. So what we have over here, we grab our workflow. So you have a few different options on your workflow. You can grab it by list or ID. So your ID is in this URL. I just use this list because I find it easier if you name them properly. I grab this workflow, which is execute sub workflow. So that's the name of this sub workflow. And then what I did is I passed in an input. So this is what we're actually going to send to our other workflow. And I'm just sending in the JSON of the previous node. So let me just run that one really quick. I'll pin this. So you can see all I did is grab this cricketer and put over here. So json.cricketer. You also have the ability to convert types if you want to. We have different modes, which we're going to cover here in a second. Now, how this populates the workflow inputs, this is actually dependent on what happens with your trigger. So let me show you that side of it. So in our second workflow, what we have over here is this trigger when executed by another workflow. And we know that this is in over here because this workflow, we put it over. And what you'll notice is we actually have 3 different input data modes. So the first one over here is define using fields below. So all I did is called a field cricketer, and then this is a string. So make sure that you match these data types one for one. So you can see we have this, and that's why we have this attempt to convert data types. So this is a string. This is pretty straightforward, Jack Hobbs. And then we have a string over here, and you can see that this has been passed in. So there's 2 other ways you could technically define this. I'm going to keep this pinned, but you can define using a JSON example. So generate a schema from an example JSON object. So you can see we have JSON like this. Now, if you have a lot of information you're trying to pass over here, this might be pretty good to use. If you really only have like 1 or 2 things that you're passing over, I would just recommend that you use with the fields. So again, what I would just say is cricketer string like this, if it's very few. And again, you can add multiple fields as you want. So really up to you if you want to do JSON or these fields. As you notice in n8n, this is quite often an option where you could define things below, or you could use JSON. The other option is to accept all data. So use all incoming data from the parent workflow. If your data is going to be changing, that's going to start this. That's probably your best use case. But I would imagine in most cases, you have specific data that you're going to be sending to a sub workflow. You might clean this up before as well with like an edit set field. So, or some sort of filter before even then. That won't really impact the fields that you're sending over, but you'd at least have some clean data or cleaner data. So I'd probably recommend using these 2, fields below or JSON. If you have no idea what you're expecting to come over here, accept all data, but I'd probably recommend those. And just based off of that, your workflow inputs are going to change. So I put the fields, defined it over here, and that's why we have that. So, okay, so let me run this over here. I'm actually going to unpin this just to show you. So this is unpinned, and we're going to run this. So you can see it runs over here. And it's this workflow executed successfully. And if I go over here, I go to executions, you'll see at 2:05, we have this execution that went forward. And you can see it's executed by another workflow. So it comes over here, it gets the cricketer Jack Hobbs, which again, we defined Jack Hobbs over here. And then it went into our AI agent. And I didn't even show you guys the prompt, but all I did for this prompt is said, based on the cricketer, I passed in our information. Can you define what years they played and what country they are from? So it just talks about Jack Hobbs playing from 1905 to 1934, playing for England. So that's our basic example or MVP. Again, just pretty straightforward. You have a workflow, you have some repeated logic, or the workflow gets really complicated and you need to move it over. Go use this specific node, execute Subworkflow. You define what your inputs are. Either you can go one at a time like this, you can define it with JSON, or you can accept all the data. And then you have your second workflow over here that chunks it up and breaks it up. So that's the basic example. Let's expand on that. Okay, now let's jump into example number 2. So what I'm doing on this side of things is I'm taking multiple items. So this one was very basic. We had one item, but what happens if we have multiple? So you'll see over here, I actually put a few different cricketers. I put Jack Hobbs, WG Grace, and then also Ranji. And so we have 3 now. I'm gonna use a split out node to turn this array over here into 3 items. So we'll go over here and we'll execute this edit fields. I'll just pin this over here. And then we have this split out. And if I just execute this, you'll see now we have 3 items where initially I added 1. If you don't know split out, just watch my split out video. So now we have 2 different options on how we want to use multiple items. So we have run once for all items. So this is actually only one call to our Subworkflow, or you can run once for each item. And this is individual calls to the Subworkflow. And this, and we're going to cover this a little bit later, is going to be considered parallel processing. And it's more expensive because you have individual executions for each item, whereas this sends over a bunch of items at once. So these are the options over here. Mode, run once for each item, run once with all items. So let me show you the difference on those. Again, this is going to link up and you can see we have cricketer. We're actually going to define this Subworkflow again. I'm going to pass in our cricketers. Initially, I had this in here, but I decided to do it the other way. So let's go across and say run once with all of these items. I'm going to execute this step. And you can see this took 15 seconds. We go over here to the AI agent. It used 3 items total because we sent in 3 items over here. And look, our output. So we have our 3 items. They processed 1 at a time across the board. Then you have the other option for 1 at a time. So when we do that, and we'll run this now again, you'll see that there's going to be 3 separate executions. So you can see this one took 4 seconds. And this one over here is going to be Jack Hobbs. Then we have our second one over here, which I want to say is WG Grace. So WG Grace. And then your third one over here, which is going to be Ranji. So you have these 2 different options. And again, we're going to go a little bit more detail for run once for each item, because this is going to lead us to parallel processing. I have a full example off of this, but you have those options. You can either send all of your items at once, as you see these 3 items, or you can take these 3 items, split them apart, send 1 at a time. Before then though, I want to show you really quick a pretty cool shortcut on creating these Subworkflows. So initially when I learned about this, I always just created a new workflow manually and built it out, but it's actually pretty easy. So in this example, we have a form, and then let's say we run an Appify actor, and then we add data into an internal data table. I haven't built this out, but what I'm going to do is just send this over into a Subworkflow. So I'm just going to highlight the nodes that I think should be in our Subworkflow. We're going to right click this over here. And then you have this option. It says convert 2 nodes to Subworkflow. And you can click Alt X if you want. But I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click on that. And then you can name it. So we're going to say Appify. And I misspelled Appify, but that's fine. Appify data table like this. I'm going to click confirm. And then what you can see is we actually have 2 things that happen. So first, I open this up in a new tab. And you can see we have a brand new Subworkflow. This is pretty sweet. And then this has been replaced with call Appify data table, just like that. So if you have a bunch of logic and you're like, man, this is going to take a lot of time, I don't really want to do this, all you do is highlight, right click, and then just go over here, convert node to Subworkflow. Pretty easy. Our next example is confirm logic from a webhook and send it to another workflow. So when you're working with webhooks, often what you'll want to do is confirm that this webhook is valid. And then after that, then you send it to another workflow. So a very common use case of the execute workflow. Now I have a full video on webhooks. I'll put it on the screen right now if you want to check it out. So highly recommend you watch that specific video, but this is just a very common use case. So let's say we have a webhook, we log our webhook in our database, and then what we're going to do is say, hey, this is valid. We have other logic here, obviously. This is valid. We can send it to this execute workflow. And then we send our data to this execute workflow, just like that. Another use case was going to be guardrails. So typically with guardrails, you'll put a guardrail either before or after an AI agent. And why you want to have guardrails, again, I just recently covered this video yesterday. There's a ton of different things that you could add in for guardrails. So this example is PII data, so sensitive data like a phone number. But you can see there, you can filter based off of keywords, jailbreak, NSFW, secret keys. If it's a different topic, URLs, custom regex, a lot of opportunities on this side of things. But this really stops like prompt injections, as well as people sending unwanted information into AI agents. So, sometimes people don't want to have an AI agent specifically have PII data. So your IT team, as well as AI engineers, should probably know if someone in your company is doing that. So imagine you have multiple workflows that have AI agents and you want to build out some sort of process to let the IT department know. Well, you can build out your guardrails over here, and then you can just build out one workflow that lets people know on Slack or email or Discord, hey, someone tried sending sensitive information, and it lets IT know. Or you could have a chatbot on a website and it goes through over here, hey, someone's trying to do prompt injections, let someone know. Again, there's tons and tons of use cases, but I just see over time, a lot of people are going to be building out these guardrails, and then they're going to send them into an execute sub workflow, and that's going to let someone on the team know someone's trying to mess with their AI agent or sending information that they shouldn't be. Now, our guardrail over here does have access to a large language model, so that that can be a little bit of an issue for people, but regardless, that is one of the use cases for guardrails. Lastly, what I wanted to cover shortly is parallel processing. So sometimes n8n workflows can move really slow, especially if you're doing a lot of different calls. So one of the benefits is doing parallel processing. And what we can do is essentially do a execute sub workflow for one item at a time. So this is much faster. The one downside is you're going to have more executions. As I showed you over here, when we did the 3 together, it took 15 seconds, granted, but with these over here, we did them one at a time and they kept going forward. So pros and cons associated with it. And again, your build off of how many executions that you run on n8n. So by default, I believe it's 2,500. So that is something to be careful for. Another thing to be careful for when you're doing parallel processing, and I didn't even put this over here, is rate limits. So if you're running data too fast and you're working with some sort of API, there's going to be limits associated with it. I talk about this in our HTTP request video, but regardless, you have to be careful on there. But to show you how we can run parallel processing, which again is one item at a time, all we have to do on here is choose that option. So run once for each item. And then what I take off is wait for sub workflow completion. So we'll run this again one more time. I'm actually just going to go to our sub workflow like this, and we will go through it. So let me grab that. We're going to execute this step and pin the data. And I'm curious if this will go a little bit faster than that 15 seconds. All right, so it ran over here. I just put a manual trigger, and then let's see how it works on this side of it. So you can see our first run took 3 seconds, then 3.6, and then 3.8 seconds. So overall, we're much faster because you can see over here, it took us, 15 seconds or so? I have my mic in the way. Or 15.23 seconds. Or if you add these up, so this is 7 seconds between them, and then 10.6. So 10.6 versus 15. Again, you have 3 executions over here versus 1. So again, take a look at the pros and cons associated with parallel processing, but it is significantly faster if you build this out. And this was just a very basic workflow. All we did is send data into an AI agent, but it can make it a little bit faster. So again, just to kind of recap our video, why you want to use Subworkflows. So first, it just simplifies things. If you have the same logic over and over again, put it in a Subworkflow, use this node, and in your multiple workflows, just send data over there. It's very common to do this when you're working with webhooks. It's very common to do this when you're going to be working with Guardrails. In addition, if you need a faster workflow with parallel processing, you could use that. If you don't care about the parallel processing and, hey, I just want to have a sub workflow, you would just go over here and choose run once for all items. And lastly, if you have a larger workflow and you want to make it a lot faster, or not a lot faster, but just chunk this up, all you have to do is select the nodes, right click, and then convert 2 nodes into our sub workflow. And essentially that is our video on Subworkflow. I hope you guys found a ton of value in this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch other n8n videos, I have a playlist. It's gonna be on the screen right now. Well over 50 videos. I try to keep this in order of what I would recommend for people to learn n8n from scratch. And lastly, again, if you want to join our school community to learn a little bit more about n8n, network with other individuals, and then eventually make some money freelancing or upskill for your job, it is down below in the description. I will see you guys in another video.